But today, we're privileged to have Rebecca Ramos with us. You know, there's a whole new wave of leadership in state government and in our legislature in Vermont since the election and before too. And there's so many spots occupied by women now, and not that that's unusual. Well, I guess it's a little unusual for Vermont, I think, and maybe Rebecca will correct me on this. It just feels like it's a new time, sort of. And so we're privileged to have Rebecca, who I pinned for this because she has a lot of background in all of the different kinds of positions we're going to talk about today. And I think some of you may have met her or at least heard of her before. She comes to us from the Crasson Group, which is our advocacy team partner for the Association of Vermont Credit Unions. You all see and hear from are two people there that represent credit unions in the State House most every day, Adam and Jessica. And you don't get to hear from Jessica very often, although we did have her at our annual meeting when the last time it was an in-person annual meeting, I think a couple years ago. But Rebecca takes care of, I think this is right, all of the maybe not all, but much of the management or operational kind of operations in the Crasson Group. At least I know she's the person that I get the bill from every month. So
I do invoice you, Joe.
Okay,
That's true.
So you're an important person. Rebecca has worked in the Vermont political landscape since 1998. She was a legal counsel and political liaison for Howard Dean when he was governor. Also worked for Peter Welch when he was pro tem in the Senate, which is also about the time that we rewrote Vermont Credit Union statutes. Some of you might remember, and Peter was instrumental in that. And Rebecca also worked for 2 years as chief of staff for Senate Pro Tem John Campbell, who's more recent in that role than Peter, and spent a number of years working with individuals, nonprofits, and businesses on leadership development, strategic thinking, and mentoring. She has a degree from Auburn University, her law degree from Vermont Law School, and a master's in environmental law from Vermont Law School. But enough for me. So, Rebecca, can I just kind of turn it over to you and
Sure.
run with it
Yes,
for a while?
sure. So I'm so excited to be here. And Joe, you didn't know this, but this issue is near and dear to me. But so thank y'all for showing up today and letting me talk to you. I kept, Adam is always like, well, tell me about what you're going to talk about. Maybe I'll show up. And I was like, bring it, Adam, but I'm okay. So you never know, Adam, he may show up. So I would like to say I'm from South Alabama and moved from South Alabama to Vermont, and then went back south for a few years to help to raise children in South Carolina. And while I was there, I was in a community where there were really not a lot of women. I lived in a state in the community where not a lot of women were running. So I, with a group of women, we started an organization, a nonprofit called the Daughters of Susan B. Anthony, and we worked in our community to get women of both parties to run for office, or even some nonpartisan, because there is data that shows that whoever's sitting at the table brings their experience to the table. And we're men and women, we're all alike, but we're all different and have different experiences. And there is data that shows that women have a different experience and that they bring that into these political conversations. And so why is that important? It's interesting because, and I think, so this was probably 15 years ago. It's very different now than it was 15 years ago or 50 years ago. But the reasons of why we want different and diverse voices at the table are still the same, right? Is because we all have different experiences, and having different people speaking up and bringing those are going to change or going to make policies better, right? Like, what if we just let all the banks make all the policies around financial institutions, right? That wouldn't be great. So the experiences are important. and let me just talk about why women didn't run. And this is from just like the work I did back then, and reading about it and trying to understand. I'm a woman. I've always been somewhat aggressive and never thought about, ceilings, or I've been much impacted by. I had a very progressive family, even though I'm from the South, and so it was just like you can do anything. But there are hurdles for women in running, and those can include things like being, single mothers, low wages, often sort of women type jobs, or get paid lower than other types of jobs, pay gaps for existing jobs. There is this sense, and I found it from my work with trying to get women to run. I don't know enough. I don't have enough experience. I don't know how I can, what my voice will bring. There is this belief you have to ask a woman 3 or 4 times to run before she will even start considering it. A lot of them don't see themselves that way. We're not brought up to, and I think this is different now. I know my girls are definitely different, my teenage girls, but because women weren't in these positions, women didn't see themselves growing up. They didn't see themselves in these positions, and so luckily those things are changing. What we have seen, and Pew has done a lot of looking at this, is that when women are at the table, what changes actually relates to it was interesting to me to read about this. What the conversations that change actually kind of reflect these hurdles, which is pay gaps, childcare, paid family leave, violence against women. What are women talking about? They're talking about their experiences. What are they writing laws about? Their experiences. What, and those, women are 50% of the population. They should be. That's a great resource that we weren't using. And so there was a great book called Half the Sky that was written like 10 years ago by Nicholas Kristof that really talked about why you don't want to give up on this 50% of the population and why they're an important resource. The other thing, and I can't remember which it was, but Malcolm Gladwell, I'm sure you are familiar with him. He in one of his books, I remember reading this, he was like, until a group of people hits like something around 30% representation, their voice actually isn't, they actually don't have the ability to influence. And I remember reading that being like, is that actually true? But like, if there is something to like having enough, you have to have enough of people on a board or in an institution to actually begin to change culture. And so what does that mean for Vermont? And so this year was a big deal in a lot of ways, with the first woman pro tem ever. It's our like 4th woman Speaker of the House, or maybe 4th Lieutenant Governor woman, our first openly trans woman, first woman of color in the Senate. What is that? It's unique. It's unique compared to most places in the country. But when you've worked with all these people, it didn't even sit with me as something that was not to be expected, right? Because we continue to want to keep pushing all these things forward. And a lot of these people have been around a long time, and they're ambitious and work hard, and they're skilled. And so so it's not unexpected. That said, I think back of my work in the Senate, like, how come there hasn't been a woman pro tem? Others have run and they've lost, which a lot of people don't realize. And was it just because they didn't have the skills? It's hard to know. It's hard to know why it hasn't happened. But we do know that that it is a unique moment, and we would like it to be a moment in which it isn't like a unique moment anymore, right? Where you're just like, oh, this person was elected and they happen to be a woman, and it's not actually even that significant because we have plenty of women running and winning. So, you know, I was doing a little kind of work earlier. We've had 82 governors in our state, in the history of our state, and we've had one woman, right? And 100 years ago, women started to vote. Like, why is it? You're just like, well, why 82 governors, one woman? Women are voting for 100 years. Why? How come we haven't had a woman? And it's not like they're not skilled or not capable. There is still something out there in our state. We don't have a woman in Congress. And Adam and I were talking about this. He was like, well, you can't get these people to retire. He's like, the incumbency is such a problem. And maybe that's part of it. It's just the incumbency is such a problem. Or often these governors are lead, like you have to go into these statewide offices, right? It's this timing thing. And women make different choices sometimes, whether it's, you know, deciding to have children or stay home. And that definitely is a factor. I know women who run and who would, even recently, while they're running, like door to door, who has your children while you're running? Where are your children? Right? I'm pretty sure like that is not happening to men while they're going door to door, right? So we're in this, you know, it's changing. People's ideas are changing, and the only way to continue is continue to run, and continue to try. I definitely think you know, you can look at childcare. Phil Scott was great on childcare, and so now we have a pro tem and a speaker also great on childcare. But I also think Phil Scott's great on childcare is because two of his fifth floor staff people were young women who were pregnant and that had babies. So it's like they are experiencing what it's like. They need childcare and they need to be able to afford it. And so there is this sense of who is surrounding these people who are elected also. When I worked for Howard Dean, almost all the fifth floor staff, so the fifth floor staff just means the people who work on like the governor's team, we were almost all women. It was almost all women. It was the central lawyer was a governor that I worked for. I mean, was a man, but and we had one policy guy, but it was the rest of us were like 9 women or 10 women up there with Howard Dean. So it is interesting the role that women, the other role that women were playing. They weren't the main elected, but they were clear with, you know, when I was working with Howard Dean, very clear where like we were pushing him on policies on where he was on things. So so it has been exciting to see a lot of these, you know, women take over and the work that they're doing. You know, what does it change? I'm not sure it's going to change. It won't be huge. It won't be huge impact. I think because I'm not sure what else could we be doing differently. I'm sure that there are some things, but our state compared to most states look a lot at sort of the kitchen table issues compared to a lot of states. Does anybody have a similar experience or have like their own experience? And I mean, what is it like in the credit union environment around women leadership?
Hi, I'm Jean. I'm from Vermont Federal. And I think there's always been a lot of women leadership in credit unions. It may not be at the CEO level, but certainly over 50% of our staff is women. And I'm sure that a large percentage is in every credit union, and they're running departments. They're they're senior managers. They're very much participants in the decisions that are being made every day.
How many CEOs are there? Women CEOs?
There are quite a few.
Great. Oh,
Do
good.
you know, Joe, how many there are that are running?
You're
You're
on
on,
mute, Joe.
Joe, we can't hear you.
Not a number I've memorized, Gene, because I'm one of those people that doesn't distinguish between male and female and people that are running credit unions. Um, but when Rebecca asked that question, because I've been doing this for 100 years. You know, my response would have been, there have been over the years a lot of women that were in leadership in credit unions, but not for the reasons that Rebecca's pointed out. Just going back historically, a lot of credit unions had their start in, very tiny operations, kitchen drawer operations, or a closet in a factory, or whatever. And I think, and somebody's going to slap me for saying this, but it is the way it was when these credit unions started in the, I don't know, 50s or 60s perhaps and whatnot, where that when they needed someone who was to be the bookkeeper, aka treasurer of the credit union and whatnot, very simple operation, and it ended up being a woman lots of times that would end up being hired to run that operation on a part-time basis and whatnot. And I think that in a lot of instances, the job grew with the credit union a lot of times. Um, but when a credit union would get to the point where it was going out doing what I'll call a search, so to speak, for its first what I'll call chief executive, as opposed to in those many decades ago, more like a manager type person. That's where you started to see the shift. And you'd see, a lot of women working in credit unions still, but you'd see more men being recruited through the CEO recruitment process to start running a credit union. I don't think that was limited to Vermont. That was nationwide in the 70s and maybe 80s and whatnot. And I think it's taken some decades since then to kind of shift that around again, and to get more to what Rebecca's here for, to kind of change that cultural divide where the people running credit unions are perceived to be neither male nor female. They're just experienced leaders. But I do remember the day where early on, it was up to a certain level. Credit unions were all run by women, and then all of a sudden it's like a brick wall. And then, going up from there, they were mostly run by men. And that's changed a lot since then, of course, for the better. But it's just the way I've seen it over the decades.
Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder who was doing the recruitment, right? I mean, like who's
Right.
making the choices to bring people to, like to the credit unions to choose.
Joe, I have an answer for you. We currently have 6 women who are manager CEOs of our 17, among our 17 credit unions.
Okay.
And 3 of them are joining us on the call today. Jean, Wanda,
Right.
and where's
Kate.
Kate.
and Kate. Sorry. Yes. So
Thank
it's
you,
out of
John.
17.
I thought a lot about this question because wanting women to run and then working with elected women and men, like, and there's the data, right? I just talked about, but then like, what is the real world experience? Are like women better with like feelings or relationships or emotions, or is there like a, Mars, Venus thing going on? And I don't think that from working with elected people, that has not been my experience. I think we have some really amazing men who are great with relationships and understanding people and have high, like, emotional IQs, and then women who don't, and vice versa. So we work with women elected people who don't value the importance of relationships and men that do. And so I haven't seen from just like straight, like it's this way or that way. I mean, some of our strongest advocates for like gun reform, for domestic violence are men. you know, some of our, so it is, I just think Vermont, I wouldn't, you know, my experience when I lobbied in South Carolina was a little different for sure. And it did seem, but it seemed partially different because there were no senators when I worked down there. And there were like, out of their 140 House members, there were like 7 women. And so it was just, you know, we're not 50-50 in Vermont in the legislature, but it's like 40%, or it's a chunk of people, it's a chunk of women, so that it's very different than when you have like no women senators. And so the conversations were different, and the conversation different, and how they approach things were different. Sometimes, and I can't repeat here, but there were shockingly different than what we see in Vermont. I also think partially Vermont is because we're so small. It feels like a family even in the legislature, and so people are more careful about how they show up and how they're going to be in that space versus somewhere that I think is much bigger. But I don't have, you know, from my experience, I don't see how they, you know, they're definitely, you know, I started looking at like, well, who's putting in the paid family leave bills? Who's co-sponsoring those? Like, is it mostly women, or, you know, like, and it's not that here. And I'm sure maybe if you spend a lot of time really going through it, it would show something different, but it is not clearly like it's just women doing the sort of kitchen table, childcare things. We're different than that.
So
That's it. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
If I could ask Rebecca, you make me want to ask a question. I don't know if it's a valid one or not, but do you think that the closer to balance between the sexes in the Vermont legislature, let's just leave it at that, is in Vermont, being closer to that balance anyway, is more of an open-minded kind of attitude in the culture in the state or whatnot? Or is it due to partially a numbers game? You got a smaller population with fewer people, fewer people willing to run for elected office. And so, it's natural that you're going to draw on, more of both sides of the sex, as opposed to like in the assembly in New York next door. And I don't know what their makeup is, but I just have this vision that is probably not a similar kind of mix there.
This is what my experience has been as someone who's lived in the South and the Southern and moved to Vermont to go to law school and stayed mostly, which is how New England people view women in their role of women. And I feel like I can be, like I said, I feel like I have experiences to be able to say, in the South, like women are empowered in many different ways, right? But often it is in the home. And even though there are a lot of women that are working, right? There are jobs that are often like not as seen. Like a perfect example in South Carolina, I worked a lot with nonprofits to help especially new executive directors and new board members. The nonprofit sector there was definitely seen as like, well, you can't make it in real business, and so you're going to go work for a nonprofit. And that often nonprofits were strung together by women because they are passionate about something, and that they did not value, those things were not valued, so money wasn't really attached to them. Here these women are like, they're not. I remember working with this very important conservation group in this community that I lived in. Everyone loved this group, but I was thinking that she was so underpaid. I mean, like, so underpaid. And I was sitting, like, they hired me to kind of figure out what was going on. And I remember sitting down with the board chair, who was from like a very wealthy family. And he was like, well, that's all she's asking for. That's all she needs, right? She had this rich husband. Like, that's all she needs. And I was just like, oh, like, we were just not, she was just like, well, I'm, like, it was just very different, just how the role of women and most often, like I had this conversation with one woman that when I first moved back to South Carolina, so this would have been like 15 years ago. We were talking about elections, and by the way, my husband at the time, we're not married anymore, was like, you cannot talk about politics. You cannot talk about politics because you're just going to start fights everywhere. And so I was asking her who she was voting for, and she said, whoever my husband tells me to. And I know New England women, like, you're not hearing that here. That is just not something you're hearing here. And I was like, well, I don't know if you heard this thing, like women can vote now. And I was teasing her. But my point is, it's very culturally very different. It's very different. And so I think partially a lot has to do with that, which is like women here or not, they don't feel like that they have to stay at home. Their husbands aren't feeling, if they want to, I think that's fine. There's probably a lot more education here. Women are told they should go to school, right? And so I think it's very different. Women here see themselves in places where I think it's different than in the South.
I also think it takes time. When I was in public accounting, when I was in school, I was probably one of the few women that was at UVM's accounting class. And now over 50% of women are in accounting and are professional CPAs. So I think sometimes it just takes time, and the focus now is more political. And I think that in time, in many places, maybe not the South, but definitely in the North, you'll see a very much more even responsibility for leadership.
I did find it interesting. I don't know if you guys read this, but like Vermont had in the country one of the largest or highest number of women that were on UI, or basically left the workforce during the pandemic. And there's this whole conversation about, well, what was that about? Like, why was that? Why, and it's just very curious. Like, why was that? Why do we have such a high percentage of our people who are left the workforce during the pandemic was women?
I think one of the things you're going to see is, or already are hearing, is that the legislature is going to take that data point to discuss and continually evaluate childcare, early childhood education, a number of very real needs in this. I mean, we have seen clearly in our staff a higher impact on our younger women who face limitations, whether we support work from home for them or not. We have seen that there is a reality to many families in Vermont and across the country where the pandemic has exposed the dependency on women to provide childcare. And we have a limited ability to influence that. We can be flexible, and we are, but I suspect many of us are facing that with our own staff, and I think you see it in Montpelier already. The discussions are happening, but that is not a good statistic for Vermont. I think that's a real concern.
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
In present circumstances, along with that, the status of school openings is a enormous factor as well, because that's where we're seeing a large kind of impact on, and the staff who's impacted is the vast majority is women and female.
So why is it? Is it single moms, or the husbands are like, my work, I can't, like, why is it like, why does the impact feel like it's more on women?
Can I weigh in here?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Bob.
No, go ahead, Kate.
I just think that it comes down to money. If the women are not well paid, they can't, and they're the lower salary of the two, then it is often looked at as an equation where, okay, well, we pay too much for childcare, so why don't you stay home? We'll lose your salary and we'll stay on mine. But for women who are earning more, we have several single moms earning more at the middle or senior management that have had to juggle childcare. They're not leaving their jobs though, because they're getting a good salary. So I do think this is related to pay and probably education.
Mhm.
In some cases, you also have people who are, the spouse is in a trade where they have to go to work. I mean, I think there's a whole range of issues that we face with obviously having a lot of people. But I've heard that issue as often as the description Kate gives. I think Kate's right. The wage gap is structurally there. That's not going away. We have a higher percentage of our staff. You know, we're probably overall 70% women. But once you get to the management level, you know, the managers were just barely above 50-50. So we have more women managers than men. But up at senior management, we have more men. Up until a year ago, we had the same number. So we had a retirement. But so I think Kate's point's well taken, that, you know, you've got people who are facing economic decisions that the pandemic has just brought to fore that are real, very real. And they balance a lot more than we understand. I mean, it's just I think that's part of one of the things we've learned a lot about is that these things have been going on for a long time. It's not like, you know, they just started with the pandemic. They're getting exacerbated by the pandemic.
My after law school, when I was working for Howard Dean, my ex-husband was general counsel at the VNRC. So I think we probably all are Vermont Natural Resources Council. So he was a lawyer of a nonprofit, and I was working for Peter Welch at that time. We had 2 children in Turtle Island, which is a childcare, cute little childcare facility in Montpelier. We could not afford to pay for childcare and our school loans in our mortgage. So that's why we ended up leaving Vermont to go to South Carolina, because we could not have keep that second child in childcare.
Wow.
And it was shame. We had shame. Like, we didn't see it as like we represent Let's Grow Kids. So we work on childcare all the time. You know, like this is our 7th year with them. And at the time, I didn't realize, like, I had a lot of shame about that. I have like 3 degrees. So does my ex-husband, right? We were like, why can't we can't, like, how are we failing? And then it was only through like working with Let's Grow Kids, I was like, oh, right. The system is just broken. It wasn't because I was failing. It's broken. But so around, you know, women and leadership, the reality is the part of the good news this year is the new speaker and the new pro tem have an incredible relationship. And I don't think it's because they're women, but maybe there's something to do with that, because I guess they had to work underneath. I don't know if you're probably all familiar. The last speaker and the last pro tem had lots of friction, maybe not gender, but they just didn't get along well. And so one of the good things that we're going to see now is a definitely better working relationship with the two chambers. Don't think it's related to gender, though.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, Rebecca, but I guess you kind of already answered. It's not related to gender. They just get along better. What about the lieutenant governor? You know, what can you talk about her a little bit politically, and you know how she figures into the equation or not as far as this issue is concerned, and you know what impact she may or may not have on the issues, the direction of things, and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, the lieutenant governors uh, responsibilities are very limited around like actually impacting policy, and and they just don't, like, you know, basically their job is to be there. They run the Senate, right? I'm sure you've all seen, you know, like at the when David Zuckerman was at the podium, he's just our, you know, Phil Scott before him, like he's working with the Secretary of the Senate, and they're just making the Senate run when the Senate gets together, when the Senate's on the floor. They don't really have a role in any type of policy decision, whatever. And actually, the Senate doesn't like it. You're a different branch of government, and as much as, you know, people care about party to a certain extent, they care about your branch of government a lot, right? And I can remember when I worked for John Campbell, Phil Scott was the lieutenant governor, and but before then, when I worked for Peter Welch, he had been a senator, and so he had been a senator for a long time, and so he was of the Senate. Everybody knew him, like he was close with those folks. But as soon as he became lieutenant governor, you know, and he's very smart, right? He's very smart, and so he didn't try to go change policies at all. Like it rarely did he ever. He understood, like, he had changed branches and his role was different, and the legislature frowns on it, and they don't like it. They're not interested, and not happening. And so and that's just, you know, I don't know if the new lieutenant governor fully appreciate that, because she has not spent a lot of time in the Senate and not really that familiar with the Senate. I do think she's, you know, like I think she's getting the hang of it. I think she's, you know, she had not really seen how the Senate works, so she wasn't even sure, like, what the script is, and then what you do, you know, like how to move things on the, you know, during floor time. But she's picking up on it quickly, and then she has created this like tea or at the seat at the table, so this thing that she's doing every other week to bring people in and have conversations. And so I think she's finding her place, which is really to be like kind of what Phil Scott did, you know, how he would do like job for a day or something. Do you guys remember how he would do that? He would go work for a day somewhere and then have a story about that. So I think she should figure out how she's going to engage with Vermonters. What she does with that information, I don't know. You know, I don't know. And I have not heard, you know, with the, you know, the governor, lieutenant governor they don't run together, not on the same ticket. So it's, there's not a lot of like, bring you in, I want to hear what you got to say. It's not like that. So I haven't seen how, if, you know, there's a role for her within the executive branch.
Well, I only asked because it was kind of a surprise from my perspective and a lot of people I know when she ended up, you know, beating out all her Democratic competitors to, you know, get the spot running for lieutenant governor, and, you know, hearing from a lot of people that she was kind of a, I don't know, breakout political up and comer kind of type and whatnot, and aggressive go-getter and all that kind of stuff. And that those kinds of words don't kind of identify with lieutenant governor position like you just described. So I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think she had some really. I think she's a hard worker, and she definitely ran campaign hard. She had great backing. She came from a strong family, and she campaigned really hard. She raised a ton of money, right? And you know, half of this is raising. You need a lot of money, and she was really good at that. Right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, and I think there are people that Vermont is the only state, as you said, that has not sent a woman to Congress. So I do think Vermonters are like, we're getting rid of that. Like, I feel like the next person that goes to Congress is going to be a woman, regardless. I hate that because we want to send the right person, not just because they were a woman, but I do think because we are the only state luckily there's plenty of highly competent and capable women, so that's not going to be a problem. But she's going to be up there as one that will, be potentially, you can see them. It's going to be, Senator Rahm, Senator Ballant, Lieutenant Governor. You can see the women, even maybe the speaker, as people that are getting set to be in that space whenever something happens. But now all our people are on the money committee, so we're like, no, don't leave.
Right. We definitely don't want to lose them from those positions right now anyway. Just when they get where we want them.
I know.
Rebecca, a question for you on kind of the legislature as a whole right now. When you think about the apparent and probably appropriate focus on COVID and the states, getting through COVID, do you see anything in the legislative session this year around some of those issues that you think the new leadership might want to accomplish?
So do you mean besides COVID, what else is going to happen?
Yeah, another way to, sure, you could say it that way.
Sure, okay. So there's going to be more money, so there's the things that can happen with one-time money, like the CRF dollars that are the new pandemic dollars. What are we going to be doing with those? There are things that are problematic that need one-time money. Like, imagine if you were able to deal with this pension issue. The teacher's pension is a huge issue because it's taking up so much general fund dollars. It doesn't allow like the budget committees to actually go put some money into the things that they need to do, right? Which is like Medicaid increases or money for childcare or whatever. There's this whole, that we have some core budget issues that are problematic, that are big. But what we have a sense is that they will pass it. So we do have a sense they're going to pass this childcare bill. It isn't the big bill. So in 3 years from now, there's this big, I'm sure you've heard about it from Allie Richards, or the Business Roundtable. But in 3 years from now, there's going to be this push to get some type of payroll tax to really do the investment in childcare to really get the high quality, affordable, not universal, but something like that. This bill that the speaker, there were 95 co-sponsors on, sets the stage for that. So it sets structural things, it gets some information, sets the way to get some information, the need to make some choices, and gets the IT done. So there's some big IT issues that need one-time money. And so that bill is very likely to move forward. The other thing that we see likely to move is that is not pandemic related, but it can be, is vote by mail. So vote by mail, vote. So anyway, Missy Johnson says she lost because of vote by mail, and all in Alburg. I don't know if you've heard that. Alburg had more people vote this year than ever, and it's because they got their mail, but they came in their mailbox, and she lost in Alburg. I was talking to her, and she said, I was just waiting for Alburg to come in because I knew I knew. She knew. She said she knew when she saw the numbers in Alburg. She knew she lost. So vote by mail, we had this incredible success in Vermont, and there's a big push to try to. It costs an extra base spending of $1.5 million. There's a big push to have that done for the 22 elections. Housing, you probably all saw that VHCB, which I know that you guys do work with them. They get funded by something called the property transfer tax. Oh, you guys all know all this. It's all money stuff. And so it's skyrocketing because of all all the loans y'all making to people, right? And so the governor put $20 million extra into VHCB for housing. So there are some very specific things that are going to be happening. Act 250, I'm sure you've all seen that. The governor did these executive orders. The Senate is saying that they will do a little bit of something, but this whole massive scale of like, you know, the big modernization, which they tried last year and failed, that seems that it seems unlikely that you're going to have that type of push happening. So those are let me look at my list. I have like a little list I keep. You guys don't care about that. Of things that may, some things that are happening that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, all the Global Warming Solutions Act, which passed last year, was the big climate bill. All that's gone into the administration with this thing called the Climate Council. And so all that is still happening. This climate stuff's happening, but a lot of that's happening on within the administration. Weatherization, you guys probably do we got all.
Some credits are very involved in weatherization.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a whole ton of money for weatherization and some one time, and that looks like there will be something happening. You know, there's a big bill that looks like it's trying to come out of Senate Natural. That is a lot more, it's a lot bigger. Their changes are a lot different and bigger than what the governor is talking about. But that does seem like some action happening around there. So, you know, there's a sense that transportation has to change, because our train, you know, like we haven't the way we do transportation, the way we tax transportation, you know, a lot of our cars are becoming electric instead of gas, how we pay for that. And so there's a lot of conversation about modernizing transportation, and how AOT shows up in that space. So you see stuff around EVs, around like how are we going to tax EVs or create fees for EVs to pay for gas tax losses, and constantly. And I don't know if you guys, you probably not, but the ed funding and the issues in rural communities around the weighting, now there is this, so interesting. When I first started working on this years ago, you know, Act 60 was like our savior, and not to a lot of people, but to people who are like, oh, we want this more equitable funding system for kids, for schools. And now there's this latest study from last year that shows that the funding formula is broken, and that rural communities are not getting the dollars they need, and it's impacting rural kids. And so like there's this like, oh, we got to go back to fix the formula. There's this whole sense of we have to fix the funding formula. So there's some very serious things out there, and you know, watching our new leaders try to figure it out too, is exciting. It's exciting to watch. Was that, I went through a long list, John, was that good?
Rebecca, if I could just ask a question to kind of dive a little bit deeper in one of the areas. You know, the state treasurer, Beth Pierce, put out a pretty strong policy position on the pension crisis in Vermont, for lack of better terms. Do you see that going anywhere this year, or is the governor and legislature going to kind of kick the can on that one for another year?
So the reality is it's a problem, and it's a lot of money, and kicking the can, as you all know, costs more money.
Yes.
With this one time, there is this thought, well, maybe, you know, since we get like the small, you know, there's a term for like small state, with all this federal money, we're getting like tons of money we shouldn't be getting because of some small state baseline or word. There's a word for that. And so we've been getting a ton more money than like most other states. And so there's this push that, well, maybe we should use some of this one-time money to really deal with this issue. The governor, as you have seen, is just saying like, you know, I'm gonna let you, treasurer, Democrat, and you new leaders, Democratic leaders, work this out, and I'm gonna just watch you. He is like staying out of it because the treasurer's doing his work for him. What we have seen in committee with some, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Jane Kitchell, who's chair of probes, Senator probes. They're trying to understand how come things are so bad. Like since 2007, we feel like that, you know, the Vermont, they feel like they've been paying why is it so bad? Why? And there is a sense like there's going to be some greater oversight into the treasurer and to this process, because they feel like maybe something's not exactly right there. Not that she didn't do, she followed the law and she, I'm sure, did the right things, but there may be greater oversight instead of like what it's like every 5 years or something. Maybe it should be, maybe they should be looking, more closely about how these funds are working, and why, like what happened. But I've never seen this much. Teachers should be worried because they will be, that at the end of the day, we don't have the money to pay for this, and who's going to pay for it will be teachers. That is what's going to happen.
Well, and the healthcare retirement fund is right behind that, and actually is a
Yes.
bigger number. So.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's not great.
The cause for it, one of them, there's multiple, is just sort of, for lack of better terms, is kind of the investment expectations were way too high for long and probably still are. And if those ever got adjusted down again, it would make the problem, to your point, worse, even though it would be trying to fix it long term.
Yeah, so it's not great. In our, our little state, we just don't have that much money.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you.
A very small item I want to throw in the mix too that might be of interest to the credit unions that do any PPP lending is, and this is something that I've heard crop up in the past couple of weeks in a growing number of state legislatures across the country, but I hadn't heard anything about it happening in Vermont until this afternoon, Rebecca, when Adam and I were going back and forth, and that's on the state, the Senate Finance Committee, rumors about digging into should we, state of Vermont, tax payroll protection program loan forgiveness because it's income to that business. So I don't know where that's going to go, but they are talking about it. It sounds like because they've heard it come up in other states.
Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Is that like,
if you're a business, it's a bad idea. If you're a legislator, maybe it sounds like a good idea.
I know it seems so contrary to what we were trying to do with the PPP, doesn't it? I think you're like, oh.
Well, it depends on whether they're letting the business claim the expenses. That's the federal issue. If I'm right, at the federal level, they're saying that the forgiveness is not taxable.
Right.
But in addition, you can claim the payroll as expenses.
That's correct.
So I think the state does have an issue. We're certainly not our issue. I mean, we're not wandering into this, just for clarity for everybody.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure that the issue is real. We've got PPP borrowers, so we have no position on this.
But it does affect your borrowers. So, and it does affect business.
But that's the question though, right? I mean, when you think about the taxability, there's two sides of it. It's not just the forgiveness. It's whether, if those dollars were used as payroll or reimbursement for payroll, can the business recognize the expense of that payroll and then not recognize the income?
Yeah. And I'm not sure we've heard this is just like a rumor mill in Senate Finance, I guess, small talk between issues among committee members. So I don't think they've dug into that kind of area yet. All they know is some senator has the idea that, hey, maybe there's a place we can get some money here. And that's, where it starts most of the time. And Rebecca, you mentioned about Mitzi Johnson. Have we seen the last of Mitzi Johnson in public office?
Well, I actually thought she would run for treasurer. I always thought that's where she was headed. She does love a spreadsheet, and she's so good in that area. Like that's her natural state was, with the money, and understanding the money. When I talked to her last, she wasn't sure what she was doing next. She had some consulting that she does, but this looks like it's Treasurer Pierce's last year. You could see, or last 2 years, you could see her getting back in there and running again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she's like saying I'm done.
So other comments or questions or issues from anybody? Yes, we've run the hour. We're down to 4:58. So we're going to give everybody back 2 minutes, I think. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for
Yeah, thanks
spending
for
the
letting me
past hour
come.
with us. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate your insights about women in state government and politics, and about the political observations too, and the issues of the day. Thanks so much for that.
Sure.
And glad to see that Alabama accent didn't stick with you too much. So maybe you can be mistaken for a Vermont accent now.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As I said at the beginning, our next one of these is going to be 2 weeks from today at 4 o'clock with Congressman Peter Welch on the line. He's going to want to hear from you, what you're hearing from your small businesses and members. So come with ideas and willing to share, please. Thanks very much. Have a good rest of your week.